Thank you. Tēnā koutou katoa, everybody. We'll just make a start, even though we're just trying to resolve some of the technical difficulties. So welcome to our Water Services Delivery Plan workshop this afternoon, acknowledging those members of the public that are here in chambers. Thank you to our staff and it's also our members, but also those that are joining us online and also participating in the presentation of the information here. I want to extend an apology. I know that a member of the public has requested to speak, but there's no public forum in this workshop today. There is a council meeting that you can register your opportunity to speak, so I would advise you to go through that process, please, but I just want to acknowledge your attendance. Today, we do have a number of our members joining online. So apologies from them in person from not being able to attend in chambers in person. So we also acknowledge Mayor Gary Kircher joining us online alongside Councillor Linwood and Councillor Thompson. And then we also have apologies from Councillor McCone and Councillor Holding for today. So just a very, very quick recap before I pass it over to our CEO, Alex Palmley, to lead our workshop. So just today's agenda, it'll cover a number of different key topics. Here sort of include an overview of the DIA assessment criteria. We also have a member of the LGFA assessment panel member providing some insights and advice. We'll be also considering the current metrics and how we are placed in regards to this being assessed by DIA. I've also include in our discussions the capital and investment program and water metering. So those are the topics that we will be covering today. So thank you for those joining, and I would like to pass this on to Mr. Palmy.
Yes, quite a packed agenda today, just by way of update as well. So you will recall from the last workshop that we'd received a letter from the DIA asking us to submit our draft water services delivery plan by the 31st of July. So that was submitted to them, badged as a rough working draft. Obviously, we've only been working on that for a few weeks, given the change in direction that we took, and we haven't had feedback on that yet. We're expecting to be able to share some feedback next week at the workshop that we've got scheduled next week in terms of how that's looking. But we do know that we've got more work to do on our water services delivery plan before it is ready to be submitted on the 3rd of September or by the 3rd of September. But I thought it'd be useful to start off with just clarifying what it is that the government is expecting of us in the water services delivery plan and how it will be assessed. So I've put together some slides here, which for members were put in convene, that explain a little bit about the criteria and the process. My apologies to those in the room that aren't able to see these, but we'll get these published later. But this has come directly from the DIA information, which will hopefully be helpful in terms of the discussions that we're going to have today. But really, in terms of background, the Local Government Water Services Preliminary Arrangements Act 2024 establishes the framework for local water done well and what we're required to do and what every council is required to do. And that sets out that we should deliver a water services delivery plan by the 3rd of September, which will then be assessed by the DIA against their criteria. In particular, whether it meets the regulatory requirements, so that's the standards we've been set by Parliament for drinking water and for wastewater, whether it's financially sustainable and whether it supports housing growth and urban development. So in terms of the assessment process that DIA have set out to councils, they will assess all parts of the plan against those legislative requirements, with a focus on identifying any risks or issues that may impact on the ability of the Secretary for Local Government to accept the plan. In doing that, they'll also undertake consultation with a number of other agencies. So the National Infrastructure Funding and Financing Agency, the Commerce Commission, who will be the regulator for water services and water services providers, the Local Government Funding Agency, and the Water Services Water Services Authority, Te Mate Arawai, who are responsible for the drinking water standards. There'll be then that assessment will then go to a panel for review, with recommendations coming out of that panel to the Secretary for Local Government. If the Secretary is not satisfied that the plan complies with the Act, they can require councils to amend and resubmit their plan.
So, may I just ask a question, just to be clear? That's the Secretary of DIA. It's not the Minister.
It's not the Minister, no, it's the Secretary for Local Government. So the Secretary of Local Government wrote to us requiring our or asking us to submit our draft plan. So he is the decision maker in this.
Right. So that would presumably, I guess then it's a matter of regulation rather. Well, it clearly is a regulatory matter. Whereas you would obviously have a political process if it was a minister to whom you might actually register objection if the plan was deemed to be not satisfactory. By what measure can, or is it possible to challenge the Secretary if they declare themselves not to be satisfied with a plan?
There's no process been set out for appealing the decision, but obviously if we were dissatisfied or any council was dissatisfied, then clearly we would look to appeal in some way or make representations.
Presumably that representation would be either first and foremost political or at least in part political.
I would suggest you'd first go to the Secretary and then go to the Minister after that if you weren't satisfied. So in terms of the plan review panel, the membership of that, one of whom is joining us today to explain a bit more about their role and what they're looking for, is essentially the panel's made up of senior leads from key government agencies, so the DIA, Commonwealth Commission, LGFA and Water Services Authority. And they're really the subject matter experts who are really understanding the assessment that has taken place and interrogating that and then confirming what the result is in terms of that assessment to recommend to the Secretary of the Local Government. I'm going to skip on for those who are following this on Convene to the plan assessment. So plans will be assessed against the requirements of the Act and in particular revenue sufficiency. So what this means is there sufficient revenue, income, essentially to cover the costs, including the costs of servicing the debt. Investment sufficiency is the projected level of investment sufficient to meet the regulatory requirements and provide for growth. So this is our investment program, which we're looking to discuss today, and that's a key point of focus for today. Do we think our investment program is sufficient to meet the requirements and the expectations through this process? And then the financing sufficiency is, are funding and finance arrangements sufficient to meet investment requirements? So essentially looking at our borrowing that we have in place or we plan to have to be able to meet that investment program, to meet the standards that have been set by government and meet any projected future growth that we see within the district. In addition to that, the above tests, the plans will be reviewed to understand the assumptions and the underlying evidence to support the financial and technical information. So this is really getting to understand our asset planning and what our thinking is behind that, what the assumptions are that have led us to conclude that our investment plan is sufficient and testing that for us. So within the Convene pack, and again, we will publish this, there's a bit more detail around what these different things mean. So assessing the financial sustainability, that's there for your information to understand the criteria. It gets into some detail. And essentially what we need to do in looking at the criteria, we need to balance off different elements. And part of this is about affordability for the community as well. So balancing off having a programme that's sufficient to meet the government's requirements and legislative requirements for water standards, meet our growth needs, meet the need to replace and renew our assets, The DIA have already signalled that they're interested in our high water loss rate. So ensuring that we've got a programme that's sufficient to deal with that is something that they will clearly have a focus on. And what does that mean in terms of the revenue we need to generate? So the charges to the water users, and what does that mean in terms of the debt as well, and getting those ratios right around financial sustainability and affordability, and sufficient programme to deliver what the legislative requirements are and what our own local requirements are. In terms of the sufficiency information, financial sufficiency, they've set out some criteria there as well around understanding where we will be borrowing from and our borrowing limits and our projections. And obviously doing this in-house, we need to put that in the context of everything else we need to do within council as well. And so within this environment of an in-house delivery, they'll be looking at how we're balancing that against the other needs of council. So we have a roading network, and how will we still meet the needs of our roading network whilst delivering on the water infrastructure needs as well. And then I've included in the pack a slide that's come direct from the DIA in terms of the plan for accepting the process for accepting the plan. So there's a process set out there around the DIA notifying each council of whether their plan has been accepted or not. And if it's accepted, we then are required to publish it on our website. But if it's not accepted, then there's a number of routes that the DIA will take with us. So they could require us to amend the plan and resubmit, or they could just go straight to not accepting the plan. And then they have a couple of choices, and depending on our particular circumstances as to what they would do. So if they didn't accept the plan, they could appoint a Crown facilitator. So that would be someone appointed by the government department to come and work with us, and possibly with other councils, to find a solution to dealing with the issues where they felt our plan was insufficient. Or they could be appointing a Crown Water Services specialist. And that's a stronger form of intervention where effectively the decision making is taken away from the council. A water services specialist would come in to work with our team and would be ultimately the decision maker in terms of what happened with Waitakes Water.
May I ask another question? It's just occurred to me that let us presuppose that it's likely from the signals DIA has sent that around the country it's going to be more focused on and more concerned about standalone or sole council operations. If therefore that does prove to be nationwide the case, and the Crown Water Services specialist or facilitator is appointed, it would seem to me that ipso facto, that person would have to engage with councils other than the standalone council on which attention is focused, because presumably one of the options they might be considering is merging a standalone entity with other operations. How do they engage with, if you like, the innocent parties? And I mean, I'm just saying, using that as a simple way of saying, effectively, other councils totally not connected with or involved with the decision that DIA is concerned about may well need to be involved. And presumably the Act allows the facilitator and or specialist to dictate, to direct them as well as the council about which it is specifically concerned. Do I make myself clear?
Yes, I'm not sure exactly how they would approach it. They've said that initially it would be by a process of negotiation, but the Act does give the government powers to be able to give some direction. But I think that what DIA have indicated so far is that they'd be looking to negotiate outcomes with other interested parties as a first instance, rather than dictate to those who have, found solutions that are acceptable to the government.
Thank you.
So that was a very quick overview of the assessment process and criteria. I was wondering whether it'd be a good point, unless there's other questions, to welcome in our guest. So Andrew from LGFA, who has joined us and I believe is on the assessment panel. So I think in terms of the dry words that I've given out there in the slides, it'd be good to hear a bit more about what that process looks like and what the panel would be looking for.
Thank you for the invitation to speak to you. So we welcome engaging with councils on their water service delivery plans. We've also got Cameron Walker from LGFA, who's also on the panel. So we're happy to provide some of our perspectives on how the process is working and comment on your water service delivery.
Andrew, if you can hear me, we cannot hear you. Do you have your mic turned on?
I do. Oops. Yeah, can you hear me? No. Oh, Stu can.
We can hear online.
Andrew, can you say something?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
So point my Okay.
Okay. Is it any better now or not?
Sorry, we're just hang on. We're just having problems with the speakers here, and we've got an IT person in the ceiling trying to fix it.
Okay.
Okay.
Just checking whether you can hear me in the chamber.
Can you say something? I don't think
I can hear you online, Gary.
Yeah, I can hear you online too.
Okay, we'll have our own chat, shall we?
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear you online.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, whilst we try and fix these issues, we're going to change our program around a bit. So I'm going to go to Josh, who's going to start talking about the capital program we've got at the moment, the investment program, and what the changes have occurred within that space, and some early thoughts about what else we might need to change within that program. So hopefully, Josh, you're ready to take over at this point.
Absolutely. Absolutely, my apologies. Let me just share my screen here. Thank you. So the intention today was to run through our current capital works program, look a little bit at the development of the capital works program, where we started in 2024 when we were first anticipating doing a 2024 to 34 long-term plan, and the revisions that were made over the ensuing 12 months to try to reduce the look of the investment program as much as possible. So as I said, in the preparation of the 2024 to 34 long-term plan, our water team, as they were, put forward $452 million worth of investment requirement. That's further detailed in the spreadsheet that you've got attached. Oh, sorry, that you've all got hard copy. For those online, my apologies. I'll circulate that after the meeting today. During that process, obviously, there was some concern about the scale of the program and recognising the need to reduce the program as much as possible. There was a scaled back version for the first 1 to 3 years of the long-term plan. Whilst we, as council, tried to figure out how we were going to be delivering water services moving forward and could right-size the program, fully understanding that Taumata ROI were looking at shifting a number of the standards that everyone was required to meet. During that scale back of years 1 to 3, there was a $54 million scale or deferment. Most of that work got pushed to the later years rather than actually being scaled back. And then through the long-term plan 25 to 34, it was reduced down to $135 million, excluding depreciation costs. Most of that work still needs to be done. There was the timing that was shifted of it, and it was pushed out to, I suppose, the next lot of 10 years rather than the current 10 years. In addition to that, there were a number of projects that were scaled back, feeling as though we could reduce expenditure because of some of the shifting standards from Taumata ROI. I just wanted to detail some of those shifts now for you all. So in a high-level summary, breaking it down from where we originally started in 2024 for compliance-related activities for water, we were looking at about $10 million, still roughly the same now. For renewals, we were looking at approximately $86–87 million. For water, the majority of that was in capacity upgrades for the Oamaru water scheme. That's now looking at $26 million. The majority of that expenditure has already been pushed out to the second lot of 10 years rather than the first. And then improvements at about $43 million. Again, that's all detailed in greater detail on the hard copy that you've got in front of you, but we'll come back to that later on. For wastewater, there was a significant scaling back. We've gone from $120 million to $28 million. The majority of that is the T.Y. Duncan Oamaru wastewater treatment plant upgrade. That upgrade still needs to occur. It's just going to be in the next 10-year period. The consent for that expires in, I believe it's 2035. Looking to my learned colleague to the 2038. Generally speaking, between design or between consenting, design, construction, you'd be looking at a minimum of a 6-year timeframe. So some of that funding probably needs to come back into the latter end of this LTP to make sure that we're actually funding the design and consenting works ahead of construction in the second lot of 10 years. There's a number of other compliance-related improvements there that are reduced. Renewals have been reduced significantly in the wastewater space, as have our improvements. And in stormwater, you can see where it was proposed not to invest significantly, recognising the amount of investment that was required just for water and wastewater. But there's certainly some gaps at the moment in terms of our investment in stormwater that will need to be picked up at a later date. So for drinking water compliance, we have 10 suppliers that are currently non-compliant, as reported to PAR on 10, yep. As was reported to our Performance Audit and Risk Committee, I believe it was the 27th of June. This details here, I suppose the supply name, why we're non-compliant, the treatment that's going to be required, and the estimated cost. For a number of these, I've listed the alternative solutions or acceptable solutions that are currently being reviewed by Taumata Arawai as a viable mechanism for compliance. I've started doing a little bit of digging into that today to ensure that our water supplies, the source water quality that we have is actually going to meet the requirements. It doesn't look as though it will. So this is kind of the minimum cost it would be, providing the source water requirements are going to be sufficient. I can detail that a little bit later on. So for a number of the suppliers, we don't have any treatment at all. For a number of them, we only have chlorine. We now need filtration, UV as well as chlorination. So there's quite a lot of work to do. Lake Ohau has had a water treatment plant installed now. It is still being commissioned at the moment, so it's still listed here as being a non-compliant supply. However, we've invested the necessary monies. It's just final stages of commissioning, so that'll drop off this list. So Curau is one of the suppliers that we've historically upgraded. It now no longer meets the drinking water quality assurance rules. It met the old drinking water standards. The standard shifted in 2022, which is one of the reasons why we need to have additional investment again in some of the supplies that we've already upgraded, because we didn't have enough of a barrier for protozoa primarily. So in the case of Curau and Otamatata, even though historically those supplies have been upgraded, we now need to install some filtration and additional UV to be able to make those compliant with the new drinking water quality assurance rules. There's a number of suppliers here that Corridor Water Management Limited look after on council's behalf, and we are working with them to try to achieve compliance. To date, you'll see there that there's a number of suppliers here that are all proposing an alternative solution or an acceptable solution. Taumata Arawai has been reviewing the requirements for those. Historically, they've been using validated units as the minimum standard that's required. Those units come in at around $10,000 just for the unit itself. They're looking at changing the standards so that we can use non-validated units. That brings the cost down to around $2,000 per unit, but then there's install costs as well. All of that is predicated upon the source water quality being appropriate. So looking at the current LTP, minimum cost here, assuming all of our source water is appropriate to be treated with what's being proposed here, we require $7.1 million. There's currently $7 million in the budget, so there's not a significant gap. So alternative solutions. I've detailed here the 6 council supplies that are possibly suitable for an alternative solution or an acceptable solution. You can see here that the population that we've got, the number of households is a proxy. I haven't gone through and counted each of the individual households that are serviced by these communities. I've used our census data to come up with an average of 1.9 people per household and then use that as the determinant. The cost per unit I've scheduled down as $7,000 per unit. That's assuming $2,000 for the filters and UV themselves. That's about $3,000 for the plumbing. So these need to be installed prior to the house coming in. There can be no water offtakes before this unit's in place. So it's either directly adjacent or outside of the house or directly adjacent to where the plumbing comes into the house. So $3,000, I think, was a fairly conservative estimate to understand how much digging might need to be done around foundations, whether there's going to have to be boxes and outdoor areas that are constructed to enable these to be stored inside of, or whether there's plumbing changes that need to be made to fit these in an appropriate location. Then $800 for electrical, and then $1,200 for an annual supply of the filters. The filters are $150 each. The lamps are $300 each. So assuming 6 filters over the course of a year, plus the lamps, adds up to $1,200 just for the ongoing maintenance. That's without anyone going out and changing them over. Before being asked to quickly present, I was just about to throw the water sampling tests that I'd had our water quality team look into. As you can see, the water quality is required to be within certain parameters for an acceptable solution to be used. Generally speaking, it needs to be below 1 NTU consistently. Most of our supplies are over 1 NTU, meaning that even if we were to be using acceptable solutions, we would need to do some pre-filtration before it would come into the households. So there'd still be a need to upgrade some kind of a centralized treatment unit at the point of pumping before it would then go into the household. None of the costs here include that. I know everyone's been thinking that the acceptable solutions might be a really good alternative that's going to keep compliance costs low. The reality is it's not necessarily the case. When we look at a site such as Tokarahi, just for the units themselves, we're looking at $2.1 million. By the time we add some pre-filtration on there, we're probably getting up to the cost that a centralized treatment plant would be anyway. We're going to have to do quite a lot of work to analyze the different options that might be available and work out whether we're still better off with moving towards a centralized treatment system or the alternative solutions. In the case of Stoneburn, the water quality there it would certainly not be suitable for an acceptable solution to be used. That's a bit of Stoneburn water I bought here just for everyone to be able to see. Really high organic loading. The filters won't filter out organics, so turbidity there is too high. When we put chlorine into the water there, it reacts with the organics, has a whole lot of byproducts that come through. Not suitable for an acceptable solution. It really needs to have a centralized treatment there, or for us to do something else with the supply, whether it's returning it to be a stock-only supply, or essentially treating it, or whatever it might be. Next slide here, I will get, sorry, that's where I was going to paste the water quality data in. Paul to talk to our renewal profile.
Yep. Thank you, Josh. Just a couple of slides here to look at the long-term water renewal and wastewater renewal profiles. I think you can see it online, maybe not in this room. So the first one is on the water mains, which includes the hydrants, the service lines, the valves, etc., that are attached to them. Essentially, we've got a big backlog of work based on the age profile of our networks. The profile on the line we can see is slightly false in the first few years, just because of the way we extend out the base or the useful life of the assets that are up for renewal immediately. But we can see there's a big backlog through the LTP period. We start to get on top of it, but beyond that, we actually need to increase the investment to get through the backlog of work that's required. Wastewater is a similar profile with a large backlog, largely due to the 100-year-old wastewater pipes in Oamaru, which we've spoken about previously. Through the LTP period, we actually make some good inroads in terms of clearing the backlog. But that doesn't take into account the quite extensive upgrades that are required in parts of the trunk network. I'll just move on a little bit to consider water metering, which was discussed during our last meeting. So we have funding set aside this year to investigate water metering, investigate the drivers, and investigate the processes, the costs, etc. And there was $8 million allocated in year 33-34 for the installation and rollout of the watering meters. That's been brought forward in the 27-28 and 28-29 financial years. So just a couple of considerations about what water metering might mean. First of all, there's quite extensive evidence that water metering results in a reduction in water use, or perhaps water production. Different councils in New Zealand who've rolled it out over the last number of years have experienced somewhere around a 25% reduction in water production. And that's achieved primarily through 3 areas. One is having better visibility of the networks where water is being consumed. It allows water entities to focus in on where leakage is occurring in the networks. and undertake repairs on the network side. Secondly, on the customer side, it allows them to identify leakage on their side of the meter, leakage on private property, and repair those. And finally, it encourages customers to change their water use behaviour. If you're paying for the water, you'll start to be a bit more careful about when you leave the tap running. So there's a leakage identification and repair side, and then a water demand side.
Yeah, we will, yeah, I'll allow one question.
With this new proposal with regard to the water metering, yes, we're bringing it or proposing to bring it forward, but it would still be within the purview of the standalone unit within council, I imagine. And presumably they would fund it in their own way. Would they necessarily expect that to be rate funded by us or by ratepayers, or would that simply be incorporated in a volumetric unit charge?
Yeah, so we'll touch on costs a little bit later, but I think ultimately how those costs are allocated would be a decision for council to work through.
Well, would it be? Because if it's a separate standalone unit, to what extent can the council dictate to it what it does and how it does it? And if it does, how on earth can it be standalone?
It's not a standalone unit. The requirement of the law is for a ring-fenced unit, financially ring-fenced unit, not standalone unit.
So I'll just continue. So quite extensive evidence of reduction in water use, and 25% is a ballpark from New Zealand experience. What are the benefits of the reduced use? Firstly, there's an environmental aspect. We're reducing wastage. Because we're producing less, because we're producing less.
Yeah, we've got now.
Yep, that's yours this time.
Oh,
Got it.
Okay, so I'll try that again. Yep, sounds good. Yep. So less water being produced obviously means less operational costs. We're not having to pump as much. We're not having to treat as much. It also allows for deferral of capital projects. And so there's just a couple of examples of large capital investment that Tauranga and Kapiti Coast were able to defer through reducing water use. There's some flow into the wastewater side as well. Less water going into the house means less water coming out of the house. And Kapiti Coast experienced a small reduction in the dry weather flows going through to their wastewater treatment plant. And also there's potentially reduced costs to customers. And again, Kapiti Coast found 75% of ratepayers were actually paying less under volumetric charges than they were under the previous fixed charges. But I just want to highlight that it's not necessarily a silver bullet, and that those benefits don't arrive magically as a result of chucking some water meters in. We've had meters in Kurau for some time, and actually the consumption there and the throughput through the treatment plants is very high, and higher than some of our other schemes. Deferral of capital costs is a definite benefit in the long term, but within the within the 9-year LTP we're looking at, all the capital projects that have an aspect that could be influenced by metering have already been pulled out. So bringing metering forward won't change the investment that's required through the current LTP. Lower water going through to the wastewater plant will reduce operational costs, but we've got large capital works that are required there, and they're driven primarily by wet weather flows rather than the dry weather flows. So there'll be limited benefit from the metering there. And finally, reduced cost to consumers. Yes, some will probably have lower charges, but there will also be potential for other consumers to have higher charges, particularly those in larger, high-use households. Just some preliminary cost considerations, bearing in mind that this is the goal of the funding that's been allocated for this year to really dig into this. But the smart meter purchase costs are typically in the range of $100 to $300. And then you've got the purchase plus the installation. A quick review of council costs across the country shows costs are in the order of $1,500 per meter install, which could indicate a bit more than the $8 million that's been allocated there. I just want to highlight this is just very preliminary information. We haven't done the investigations yet. And then the meters, once they're in, don't last forever, and they'll need an ongoing renewal cycle. 10 to 20 years has been the experience of some of the councils around New Zealand. And finally, there's an operational cost to having the metering, increased costs for the reading, the billing, the repairs and maintenance of them. Finally, just want to outline a little bit the steps that are required to move from a non-metered situation to installation of meters through to volumetric charging, because it's not something that can happen overnight. There's a market assessment that needs to take place where we're looking at the different meters on the market, assessing their compatibility with our current manifold setups in the different towns, looking at the connectivity if we're going down the smart meter route, look at the different networks that are available, the price structure, and developing a business case for the project. There's also a lot of work around development of policies, of tariff structures, and setting up the administrative and billing systems that would be required there. Obviously, a procurement process. Community education is a big one. Going from a situation where water is unmetered to metered, if we're going to get the benefits of the behaviour change, there needs to be a concerted effort with the community. Installation of the meters, obviously, and finally, experience through New Plymouth District Council, who rolled this out relatively recently, was that they highly recommended at least a year of dummy billing. So we're reading the meters, we are issuing bills, or issuing statements, but not billing them for the first year. And that gives a period of time for the behaviour to become ingrained, for the systems to start working so that the billing process is reliable. But also gives customers time to identify leaks on their property, right? Start to understand how their bills are working, start to realise if consumption is high. And certainly New Plymouth Council found quite a large reduction in water use even before they started charging. Just the very fact of billing and making it visible what was happening had quite a big impact. So really just want to highlight that even once we make the call to go the metering route, it will be a number of years before we are able to be in the position of charging for the water through volumetric charges and seeing the benefit of reduced water consumption. So I'll pass back to Josh.
Excuse me. I'm just thinking that we do have some online guests that are time pressed and they would need to go. So I would be asking our elected members if you do have any questions, just to note them down so we can come back to this and give it a bit more time. I can sense and feel that everyone will have a lot of questions, which deservedly need time. So we might invite our GFA assessment panel member Andrew to be invited to speak.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes,
That's
we can
better.
hear you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. So LGFA is very happy to engage with councils on their water plans. Also got my colleague Cameron Walker, who is also a member of the Water Service Delivery Plan Review Panel. So by way of background, we've gone through 3 plans so far, covering 4 councils, which have been approved. So we can give you a perspective, maybe not from the panel, but from LGFA's sort of perspective on how we've sort of thought about things. Just the LGFA board position is to support councils with whatever their preferred option is. So we're not going to provide any advice on what we think you should do. We'll support you with your plans, and also just acknowledge the council staff that have put together a draft plan in such a short space of time. That's not an easy job to turn it around so quickly. So I think you've done pretty well putting a draft together quickly. LGF, I'll comment on your actual sort of plan, but just LGFA see very much the challenge as being an affordability one for water users as opposed to a financing one. LGFA has a AAA credit rating, so accessing the finance in a cost-effective way is pretty straightforward. So that's not really the challenge. So we can get you the debt to support your plan. It's really the ability of water users to pay for the level of capex that's going to be required from the plans I've looked at is really going to be the challenge. Also, just one of the things that when we get plans on the Water Service Delivery Panel, that comes with a review, an engineering review from Becca. So we're not engineers, so we're very much relying on the engineering report to look at the whether there's sufficient capital expenditure in the plan to be able to meet the water standards. And when it comes to the water standards, we also know that they are not optional. They're things that councils have to comply with, and affordability is no longer an excuse that you can sort of use. So if the capex is going to be required by the Te Mara Arawai, then it sort of needs to be in the plan. So also just noting on your plan, the one thing I did pick up on was, compared to the other plans I've looked at, the level of stormwater investment is quite sort of low. So I think that's one thing that probably the panel will pick up on. So it's sort of less than half probably of a number of the other plans that I've sort of looked at. So water meters you've sort of touched on. So the LGFA board's view on water meters is we think that is best practice. So in time we would encourage you to sort of go down that path. In terms of the initial debt transfer, LGFA has no position on that. So while you've used the amount of debt that DIA previously agreed was your water debt, you can transfer either a greater amount or a lesser amount. So LGFA isn't going to have a view, but the amount you transfer obviously is going to impact on the level of sort of water charges that are going to be in place. The level of revenue increase in time of 114%. Again, that's about in line, I think, with what other sort of plans I've seen. But the other plans have generally had more modern water infrastructure. So again, I think when I look at the level of your water leakage and the age of the infrastructure, the risks are that you're going to need more capex rather than less in terms of what you've sort of put into the LTP. One thing I did notice is by the end of the plan, you're probably getting water users overpaying for water because you're trying to constrain the amount of sort of debt to keep your debt metrics sort of modest. And in particular, you've got the spike in capex in 2032, 33 and 33, 34. And that's really starting to create some issues with the overall debt levels in the plan. And in contrast to all the other plans I've looked at where the debt metrics are improving over time, yours are actually deteriorating. So one thing I'd also be looking at is what does it look like in 235 onwards, because the trajectory that you're on isn't sustainable. So if there's other big lumpy capex in there, that is really going to start to be problematic without another very large increase in water charges. And it's also, you know, again, by the end of the plan, the council's overall net debt to revenue is going over sort of 200%. So it's really also starting to constrain what the council is going to be able to do in its own name. So over 200% net debt to revenue for a council isn't unusual, but the councils that have those sort of debt metrics tend to be high growth councils as opposed to rural or provincial councils that have lower levels of growth. I've touched on your FFO to debt ratios that, yeah, trending the wrong way. So once you're getting down to 7% by the end, that is very low compared to all the other models that I've looked at. So most councils by then are building a lot more strength in their water plans. So I think that's a worry. And the last point I just wanted to make is that LGFA will also be looking at your new LTP to ensure that there's balanced budget outcomes across the whole council. So what we don't want to see is the remainder of the council running operating deficits, i.e. that there's a transfer of revenue from non-water into the water, which is probably the opposite of what's occurring now, where a lot of the revenue collected from water is actually being used for non-water sort of purposes. So we liked your LTP that was adopted, but that had water sort of going out. We were happy with that. We were quite uncomfortable with your draft LTP in terms of some of the operational deficits that were forecast. So had you not been intending to transfer your water assets out, we would have written to the council to express our concerns about some of those operating deficits because we don't believe that they're sustainable. So I'll perhaps stop there, but yeah, Cameron and I are happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you very much for that, Andrew. Do we have any questions from the members? Councillor Hopkins.
Just apropos of that matter that you raised earlier about the optional quantum of debt that can be transferred or assigned to the ring-fenced entity. Am I right in assuming that's a zero-sum game? Because if you say to yourself, if we say, oh, we want to keep water charges low, so we will only assign a percentage of the debt accrued to this new ring-fenced unit, then effectively debt servicing and debt repayment costs will sit with ratepayers anyway. So am I right in assuming that there's no actual benefit to anyone by saying, oh, we won't transfer all the debt, because effectively if we do, we're essentially obliging people to pay that margin through a different mechanism?
That's correct for the in-house model, that it will change your water charges at the expense of other rate sort of income. It does matter a little bit where you're going to a multiply owned water CCO, that there needs to be, which you're not planning, but in that case, there would need to be sort of agreement between those shareholding councils and the CCO to have some agreed methodology, because under DIA's previous sort of methodologies, there was 8 different ways, I think, of determining water debt, because every council was doing it in a slightly different sort of way. So where, yeah, there's that CCO, multiple CCO option, then you do need to, between those sort of shareholding councils, agree a methodology.
Thank you. Any other questions? I think everyone are deep in thought, Andrew.
No, that's good. I
Is
mean, overall, I thought your plan has sufficient revenue. So in terms of being able to meet the requirements, then it will meet that test, because there is enough revenue. Whether it has enough capex in the plan, I can't tell you. So that we will have to rely on Becca. But I did note with interest the presentation we had on your capital expenditure plans.
Actually, if I may ask another question, you said at the end of that presentation to us just now that you'd looked at our long-term plan and you were satisfied with it because it proposed to transfer water out into the JV in the first instance. But you then went on to say, had we not intended to transfer water out, you, LGFA, would have written to us basically saying, oi, this ain't good enough. Well, that's exactly what's happened. So where's the letter?
Yeah, I said with your draft LTP, when I looked at it, it had some very big operating deficits in the plan. In the final LTP, I think it had water going out, and at that point you reduced your rates, but you still maintain balanced budgets over the remaining years in the LTP. So we were comfortable with that. So it's obviously the balanced budgets are achieved because you're only reducing your amounts. You're only reducing your rates by a certain percentage, which is still sufficient to achieve balanced budget. Well, the 100% sort of balanced budget sort of outcomes. I mean, overall, if you've gone to a water CCO, I mean, regardless of the model you use, people are going to pay more because one, there's going to be higher water standards, and two, there's going to be a lot more sort of capex required, and that's across the country. So regardless of the model, people are going to pay more one way or the other, and Standard & Poor's have made that sort of very same comment that there's no free lunch here. People are going to have to pay more because we are requiring higher water standards.
So, and just a reminder, sort of building on that point, that last week we shared the financial information with councillors in terms of what it would look like for water charges and water alone as a ring fence unit, but also the impact on the wider council, and showed that the proposed increases in revenue would enable the council to have balanced budgets going forward as well, which is important. I was wondering, I think that's really useful information we've got there and feedback in terms of the draft plan, but I wondered whether to build on that now would be a good point to bring Stu in to share some of his analysis of our plan against the things that we judge by the DIA on, and then maybe have a break and then come back to the capital programme and the water metering discussion and get some feedback and direction on those perhaps as a way forward.
Thank you. That sounds good. Thank you, Stu.
Hi, everyone. I have a brief presentation I'll try and share. Hope everyone can hear me. So where's the little slideshow button? So hopefully that everyone can see the presentation on the screen
Yeah.
in the room. Cool. Okay. So what I want to take you through today is just an overview. Well, I'm going to start with just an overview of the data that we've used here in the approach. So what we're taking you through effectively is some of the DIA metrics that are used at least as part of the assessment process when they're going through water service delivery plans. And in particular, some of the benchmarking that they will compare the water service delivery plans to from a data set that they have from across the country. So that data set is the 2024 LTP data set. It's not based on water service delivery plans that have been submitted to date, although I would expect that DIA is keeping a record of the water service delivery plans that are submitted to date and should be updating its benchmarking data set with those water service delivery plan pieces of information. Through my experience working in water service delivery plans, that is only likely to move those benchmarks in one direction, and that is typically up in terms of level of investment and level of expenditure outlined in those water service delivery plans. So there's a little bit of a caveat here. The other caveat here, I guess, is that the information I'm presenting here is based on the draft water services delivery plan. The draft water services delivery plan that we presented had no adjustments to the capital program in it, apart from moving the water metering forward. We do fully anticipate that through the review process and the feedback that we received from DIA, it is likely that we may have to make some adjustments to that capital works program, among potentially some other adjustments to the data as well. So we're awaiting some of the feedback from DIA to help guide where those adjustments are. And of course, those adjustments will need to be brought back up to you all at council to make sure that we're comfortable with the adjustments that we're making in that plan before we submit it as well. So the information I'm presenting here isn't necessarily a pass or a fail. I'm presenting this information to highlight the areas that we expect DIA will have some concerns. So where I present some of these benchmarks, like I say, DIA will be looking at graphs that will look very, very similar to these. And obviously, we'll be using those graphs to inform how much further they might want to do deep dives or how much more they might want to ask questions, or what additional information they may need to get some comfort around your plans. So the first one I want to show you here is the water bills that are projected within the in the draft water services delivery plan at the moment. So that purple dotted line, the one that is at the bottom there, is the average water services bill per connection, including GST from the draft water services delivery plan. The red dotted line is the national average, or the national weighted average, excluding Auckland and Watercare. So they've taken out that the Auckland and Watercare probably have much lower charges than that, and the trend there. So this all looks quite positive. If I was sitting in Waitaki District Council right now, I'd probably be looking at this going, this is all quite good news. The average water services bill per connection at the moment is looking reasonably good compared to the national average. Now, it's worth remembering, however, as I move through this slideshow, that of course this does not include any adjustments to our capital program or to our operational expenditure, other than bringing that water metering forward. The next slide I want to show you, though, is the cumulative investment per connection compared to, again, that national average. And so, again, I want to note that this doesn't include any of the adjustments that we might need to make to the capital program, and that it increases here, any increases in the cumulative investment per connection that will come through in this chart will have a consequential impact on debt and charges in the model. So if we have to increase investment, we have to increase either our debt or our charges or some combination of the two of them. The national average here again, and I've gone the wrong way. The national average here again, obviously, like I say, being based on LTPs, not the water services delivery plans that may have an increase in the investment in them. So I think, taking on board the stuff that you've already had presented to you from Josh, as well as the stuff that's already been presented to you and the comments that Andrew has noted from LGFA and their observations of the plan, I think what you can see here is that with Waitaki being that much lower than the national average of the cumulative investment per connection, there is likely to be a reasonable amount of interrogation from DIA around your capital works program. Even with that uptick in some of the investment that is happening in years 2033, 2034, we're still not reaching that cumulative investment level in 2034 as we are elsewhere, as is observed elsewhere in the country. It's probably also worth noting this is cumulative investment per connection. So if you have really high connection density in your area, so you're like an Invercargill or a Nelson or a Napier, which is a very small urban area with a relatively high level of connections, you would expect that the cumulative investment per connection is going to be lower than the national average. If you have a really low connection density, so you have a number of connections spread out over a sparse geographic area, you would probably expect that your cumulative investment per connection would be above that national average. While I showed you some really good news before in terms of what the charges are against the national average, this is the average charges as a percentage of median household income. So this is taking those charges and comparing them to what we're projecting the median household income to be in Waitaki. Obviously, there is a lot of crystal ball gazing going on there in terms of what is a median household income likely to be in 2034. In our projections of median household income, we've pegged the income growth against the movements in the local government cost index, and we've looked at how that comparison has occurred also in the past. So we've looked at historic income growth in Waitaki versus growth in the local government cost index, and then we've looked forward and said, well, whatever that trend was in the past, we can assume that might happen going forward. So as we inflate costs in our plan, we are also using that same baseline to look at how we might increase income in Waitaki. And the problem that we have here, I guess, from my perspective, is that while we are currently below the 2.5%, and even getting up to 3.3% is not as horrific as I have seen in other water service delivery plans for some regions, we have a significant increase in what that affordability metric looks like overnight, right? So we're going from 2% or below 2% to over 2.5%, around 2.7% between 2026 and 2027. So whenever I talk to councils about affordability, I always note that affordability isn't just an absolute metric, it's also that year-on-year change that we need to look at, because that significant increase in terms of bills that might occur over a very short period of time can have a really big impact on people's budget and their ability to budget for those increased costs. So again, that red line going through the middle, that's DIA's recommended benchmark of 2.5%. They really talk about a band of about 2.5 to 3.5%. One of the things that we probably also have to be conscious of here is, I guess, if DIA is seeing that charges are getting increasingly unaffordable, and they know that you potentially have alternative options, that's where they might start questioning whether your affordability is, whether there are other ways to address affordability that haven't been dealt with in the plan. Again, this is average charges based on the unadjusted capital program, and there are no other adjustments to that financial projections other than what have already been discussed with council in previous workshops. On the other hand, while our cumulative investment is below the national average per connection, our net debt per connection exceeds the nationwide average in 2033 and 2034. So we again don't include any of those uplifts, but we are seeing our net debt increasing significantly, which is a combination of investment requirements, but also potentially our charges potentially being lower than they otherwise need to be. And as Andrew also noted earlier, in those years, the 2033, 2034 years, council as a standalone business unit, its water services would have an FFO ratio that is lower than what would otherwise have applied to a CCO of the same size. It also has, in 2034, its debt to revenue, Three Waters debt to Three Waters revenue ratio is sitting just above 500%, and 500% not being a hard guideline, but certainly a number that DIA tends to look to in terms of Three Waters debt to Three Waters revenue. Just to add to some of the other metrics that DIA will look at here as well. So our operating expenses per connection are low. And what's particularly interesting to me is that they are decreasing over time, with the exception of a spike there that relates to some specific one-off OPEX that's occurring in that year. We have operating expenses that are low and decreasing, while there are no efficiencies assumed in this plan. So what is happening here is that we are just not increasing our expenditure to keep pace with growth in the number of connections in our district. And potentially our operating expenditure budgets are too low over that longer period of time. So another area where we may need to have a look, and certainly if I was DIA looking at this graph, ignoring that little spike in 2031, if I assume that was smoothed out, even assuming that was smoothed out, I'd probably be looking at that graph and wondering what is driving that difference in the trend, particularly when the national trend is for that curve to be going upwards over that same time period. So I would certainly be questioning whether there was enough operating expenditure modelled into your plan as well when I'm looking at that, if I was at DIA. And then finally, I think Andrew's already touched on this, so I won't dwell on this one too long. This is your free funds from operations to net debt. What we're looking at, really, there's two bands here. This is just from DIA's benchmarking tool. So the bottom band there being at 8%, which is the lowest FFO ratio that the LGFA offer. They would not be offering that to a CCO of Waitaki's size based on their latest guidance. The line that if you had your own CCO that you would have to stay above is that 10% line down the middle there. And we see that dropping below there in 2033 and 2034. Now, I will caveat that with you are an in-house water services delivery unit. An FFO metric is not a metric that is imposed by LGFA on an in-house delivery unit. That said, DIA is certainly looking at this when they are assessing in-house models. We are already preparing for battles with DIA around their assessment about whether councils are financially sustainable in in-house models, whether they do not meet this metric in-house. I don't know what an appropriate metric is for an in-house FFO. I would suggest it would be lower than the equivalent size CCO on the basis that a council presents a different credit risk than a CCO would. And I would imagine the credit risk that a council would present to external creditors would be a lower risk than what a water services CCO would present, although noting that the water services CCO does have guarantees of council, so it may not be materially different in terms of that credit risk. The last one I want to show you isn't from DIA's benchmarking tools, but was probably the thing that stood out the most to me when we were preparing the water services delivery plan based on your current program. And this is the asset sustainability ratio. Now, DIA don't specifically set a target benchmark, but the way that the ratio is calculated by subtracting 1 so that it's either above 0 or below 0 leads to a pretty clear inference about if you are below 0, it's probably not a good thing. If you are below 0, it means that your investment in your renewals is that much lower than depreciation in those years. So across this timescale, we are typically well below 0 in terms of our investment in renewals, and typically well below the depreciation of those assets. I think, again, one of the key things that stands out to me is that we have high levels of water loss in parts of our network and water services, yet our drinking water renewals investment is also lower than depreciation if we're even just looking at drinking water alone here. So those two things together, the high water losses versus the low level of investment in renewal of assets, don't seem to marry up terribly well by me, although I am not an asset manager or an engineer either. So, you know, take that as you will, but I would suggest that it's unlikely that Becca is going to hold a terribly different view to that. That is all of the metrics that I wanted to present to you today. It's not a deep dive into every metric that is in the water services delivery plan. I think one of the key things I haven't presented here, obviously, are the financing sufficiency and revenue sufficiency tests. One of the reasons I haven't presented those tests specifically today is that when we're modelling out a water services delivery plan, we are always ensuring that we have sufficient revenue to support the borrowing that's in that plan most of the time. So there is, that's already deliberately built in. Those tests will look like they are compliant, but of course, underlying that is the affordability question. Just because we can generate enough revenue from in a model doesn't mean that our ratepayers can afford to meet that revenue requirement. So that's the information I just wanted to present today in terms of some of the stuff that DIA will likely look at and pick up on as they go through your draft water services delivery plan. It's really important, though, of course, that we also note that this is a draft water services delivery plan. Part of the benefit of us submitting the draft early is to elicit that feedback from DIA so that we can make informed improvements to our delivery program and the work that we're going to do in the delivery plan. So I think, you know, a negative view from DIA at this stage is not necessarily a deal breaker. It's not necessarily going to be the end of the world, but we do need to be aware that when we do get that, we are going to have to address those issues in the final plan. Otherwise, we're going to get the same outcome from DIA. We can't continue to do the same thing and expect a different outcome each time. So that is everything I wanted to present today. Let's move on to my thank you slide.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Stu, for that informative presentation that you've provided. I'll just open it up just for a couple of minutes to the members just to ask a couple of questions or make comments, and then we're just going to take a short break and then we'll carry on with the rest of the agenda.
We see draft plan that was submitted to DIA. Where's the plan? You have LGFA, you have the consultant talking about this plan, we haven't seen it, maybe we see it.
Yeah, we can publish that today with the rest of the material from today.
Thank you for the question. It's a good question and we'll publish that. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, Stu, thank you for the update. That last graphic is a sort of a woeful W, isn't it, really? But I have a specific question with regard to, and it might sound minor, but if you look at the net debt per connection exceeds national average graphic, the fourth bullet point doesn't make sense to me. Am I right to interpret that to mean that the combination is a result of investment being lower than national averages, although more debt is required? Because at the moment, the way it's worded, it doesn't say that. So what does that fourth bullet point actually mean, please, in your opinion?
Sorry, I did pull these slides together in a rush this morning while travelling between our different offices. So there may have been a couple of typos in there. I think what I'm trying to suggest here is that the combination of you needing more debt than the national average, but your investment, your cumulative investment being lower than the national average, is a little bit perplexing and a little bit alarming. And what that is really saying is that probably historically we have not been collecting enough revenue to support the capital program that we have going forward. So that is forcing debt to go up, and that's going to cause issues. Obviously later on, as Andrew slightly alluded to as well, is, well, this is all good. What happens after 2034 or, you know, in 2035 and beyond?
Thank you. Councillor Blacklow.
Well, thank you. Just a quick question, Stu, regarding the comments in relation to FFO. Is it the FFO graphs illustrated here, is that from an all of council perspective or just the water unit itself?
That's just the water unit itself. So it's actually staying above for a number of years and it only drops off in 33, 34. And that's just council, I mean, just water services revenue or water services FFO and water services debt.
Thank you. No, it's good to clarify that. And then just the last slide about the asset sustainability. What are the key I've got a couple of questions here, so I'll just rattle them off and then you could answer them. But what are the key areas for focus and consideration to address those? Or I suppose you've already kind of touched on it in and around your comments regarding historical undercharging, but is that the primary driver there, or are there other matters we can?
So the asset sustainability ratio that I've reported there, that's based on your renewals program in your capital works program, right? So and it's divided by the depreciation on those assets. We can't really change the depreciation on the assets. I mean, we could change the estimate of the useful lives of them if we had a reason to do so, but you wouldn't typically expect to do that. So what it is showing is effectively the planned renewals are in some years 30% lower than the depreciation in those same years, which in some areas is probably okay in some areas of the country, or when you have a particularly young water network or wastewater network or stormwater network or a network that is in really good condition. I think when we reflect on what Paul Hayes presented earlier today and some knowledge of some high levels of water loss in some parts of your district, and I acknowledge that that's not across your entire district, we would probably expect to see that our investment in renewals would be a lot closer to the level of depreciation that's in there. So the way we resolve that is spending more money on renewals.
Yeah, sure. And we've seen earlier today that that some of that had been pared back. So yeah, I guess just a question, an overarching question. I'm just trying to make sense of what's been presented here today compared with, say, the comparator model that came through in the Southern Water Done Well. Probably of particular note, the comments today suggesting that our debt profile continues to increase over time. But when we look at the Southern Water Done Well consultation document and the all of council position by the end of the 2030s, the debt profile dropped away over time. So are you just able to comment whether the same approach and methodology was adopted between the two, or are there some key differences there?
So, I mean, the biggest key difference here is that in the information I presented to you today, we have not tried to ratchet up our revenue to stay within debt to revenue limits. So we haven't included additional revenue in those charts at this stage. So we are just basing that on the revenue requirements to effectively fully fund depreciation and meet your financing costs within those charts. So there is no additional revenue in there to make compliance. And that's why we've got, debt to revenue exceeding 500% in some of those later years. And that's probably also why we've got the FFO looking particularly poor in 33, 34. We would normally expect that we would ratchet that revenue up to stay within those limits. So the comparator case deliberately took a long-term view, a 30-year view, and made sure that we weren't breaching those limits. There was a deliberate amount of revenue that was added in there to make sure that's happening. At this point, we're wanting to present an unadjusted water services delivery plan so we can start building from the ground up what we need to deliver to be able to meet DIA's expectations.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions or feedback from the elected members?
Sorry, Stu, just me again. One more question. Regarding the commentary around the median household income, if we were to implement metering, would it be useful to somehow illustrate the impact on particular and varying cohorts of the community in terms of that sit in particular spaces around that constraint on household income, but a very realistic likelihood of a large difference in volume consumed?
Yeah, I think it could be useful to demonstrate. I think what we have to be conscious of course, is that there are a number of decisions that have to be made before we can actually figure out what a price on a volumetric basis is, which are going to make it really tricky for us to do that. And one is we would need to understand how much water loss we can avoid, because what we need to understand to be able to work out those charges is not how much water is treated, but how much water is supplied to households, because that's what we can charge our water charges on. We'd also need to make some judgment calls on which proportion of those water charges were fixed versus volumetric. And then we'd have to make, we could probably look at evidence from elsewhere around this one, but we would have to make some judgment calls on what average consumption would be at different cohort groups to be able to work that out. I think it could all be quite useful. We could make some broad assumptions in there, outline those broad assumptions in the plan, and that might well present some improved affordability metrics. I think the thing that I would caution, of course, is that if we are bringing the average charge down for one cohort, we are bringing the average charge up for a different cohort. And I understand in particular that you have large Pacific Island communities that often have large families and potentially large families in a house which might have higher levels of consumption, but not necessarily that higher level of income that might otherwise come. So those are the groups that we'd probably be really conscious that might actually not look so good in that affordability metric as well. So I think we just need to be careful what we wish for if we start going down that avenue too far.
Thank you for that, Stu. Any questions? Otherwise, okay, thank you very much for that. We're just going to take a short break and then we're going to come back in about 5 minutes time and then just complete the last part of the capital investment and the water metering. And I know that some of the elected members had questions, so we can go through that. Okay, what we might do now is thank you everyone for the session earlier, and then also just for this next part, we will look at the capital investment program and then the water metering, and just go back to Josh and Paul, and then there has been a common theme around investment with our capital works program. So we might pass it over to you just to recommence that part. Thank you, and welcome to those joining online as well.
Thank you very much. So just on the acceptable solutions issue, as I said, I was hastily trying to put some water quality data together that would indicate whether an acceptable solution is going to work without some form of pre-treatment on the supplies. I've managed to get the information together here, and we can see for all of the supplies that are not yet upgraded, where an acceptable solution was an option that we were putting forward as the most cost-effective option. The average turbidity over the past 12 months is greater than 1.45. That's being the best option we have. And that would be for Stoneburn, which does have quite a lot of organics in there. And for that reason, I don't think it would be particularly suitable for an alternative solution. Anyway, the draft exposure standards that have been put out from Taumata Arowai indicate that source water quality should be less than 1 NTU. So that would indicate that all of the supplies that we're looking at for an acceptable solution need to have some form of pre-treatment.
NTU is notional turbidity unit, is it?
Nephelometric turbidity unit, yes. Yep.
Sorry?
Nephelometric turbidity. Yep. So I suppose to the point of managing cost within the program, we'll need to make some allowance for pre-treatment for source or some selective abstraction, storage tanks, pumps, so on and so forth. We'll need to do some work around what the ideal options are. But I suppose it's not as straightforward as us just putting on a whole lot of these units into people's houses because the source water quality isn't over high enough standard.
Josh, what would be the NTU out of taking your point about the organics, but that aspect aside, what would be the NTU of a say if you had a tank in place that was then feeding the point of entry filtration unit on a house.
Sorry, I'm not entirely sure that I understand the question.
So say there's a tank at a residential dwelling receiving either jointly rainwater and from the stockwater scheme,
Yep.
or just receiving from the stockwater scheme itself, and ignoring the fact that there may be some organics issues to get around. What would be the NTU coming out of the tank going into a house if there was a filtration unit on the side of the house?
That would depend upon each of the suppliers, how much of the solids actually settled out. What I'd probably be suggesting is that we settled it out before it went into the tanks. The rules as they're currently, the draft rules as they're currently written, state that it's the point of supply, whether it needs to be lower than the 1 NTU. The point of supply at the moment is this side of the tank. If it's on the other side of the tank, council then would assume responsibility for the tank itself, which is not something that we would particularly want to do. So the restrictor at the moment is before the tank, and then everything that's in the tank is the responsibility of a property owner. So the NTU, as currently noted, needs to be low enough before it enters the tank. So the tank isn't used necessarily as a treatment unit, according to the standards as they're currently drafted. I know that doesn't make a lot of sense, but we'll continue trying to work through it. What I'm saying here is that we need to make some allowance that there may be some additional cost on these to bring that turbidity lower. Yep. This here is another slide that I've just put in there that outlines the roadmap to compliance that Tom Arroweye have released. So this indicates essentially what's required of councils over the next 3 years. In the 25-26 financial year, basic treatment barriers are installed and operational, working effectively. There's a low tolerance for repeat E. coli notifications, and all council supplies already registered. So we meet most of the requirements within here. Where it gets a little bit difficult for us is in the 26-27 financial year, where we need to have full compliance with the drinking water quality assurance rules or an acceptable solution in place. As I said previously, we've got 10 suppliers currently that don't meet the drinking water quality assurance rules. So all of those would need to be upgraded before the end of next financial year. Question, Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, I think you've answered it. In fact, basically, yeah. So my question was whether the Tomato Arroweye expected an acceptable solution to be identified rather than implemented. And what you're saying is that by the end of 2026, December 2026, it has to be implemented. Is that what you've just said?
We'll probably say July 2027. Sorry, June 2027. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The other point to bring to your attention would be 27-28, where it says there at the final bullet point, contamination events resulting in the need for consumer advisories are rare. So that's essentially saying that boil water notices are not tolerable. When we do have instances where there is significant rainfall and our source water becomes murky and is unable to be filtered, we then wouldn't be able to rely on issuing a boil water notice at that time. So we'd need to ensure that whatever treatment we had in place was able to withstand those kinds of instances because they're easily foreseeable. Been through most of these. This is where we get into the works program, which is again the copy you've got, hard copy there in front of you. So here in the first section to the left, we can see what was in the original draft LTP in 2024, and then a summary of what's in the current LTP. So looking between the two, you can see that there's a gap in between what we'd indicated we needed for investment in 2024 to what we currently have for investment in 2025 through to 34. this particular slide, it does look as though we're investing more than we anticipated needing to. However, in the year 24-25, the Tokarahi upgrade, the Awamoko upgrade, the Curry Hill upgrade, the Windsor upgrade, and the Stoneburn upgrade and the Bushy Creek upgrade were all pushed forward through the LTP. So when you take those several $1 million off it, it actually still shows that we're not quite investing enough or as much as what we thought we would need to in 2020. And part of that is reflective of the shift in standards from Taimata Arawai. And part of that is just reflective of us needing to scale back the program to be able to be within the investment requirements that council's set to date. So I've split this up by compliance related items, which is on this particular slide here. And it's reflected as well in the hard copies you've got there. And then into where we've got improvements and where we've got renewals. The biggest shift from 2024 to 2025 is in the improvements area. You'll see there that the Oamaru Water Strategy Source Resilience build, we've significantly reduced the investment amount there, as well as in the Oamaru Water Strategy Phase 1 build, Phase 2 planning. Those are both now shifted out to the second 10 years. And if we were to do some water metering investment, we may be able to defer those further back again. Yep. The other point that I would draw your attention to at the moment is the Oamaru urban water main renewals. We've reduced the budget within the first 2 years there. That doesn't quite give us enough money in renewals to be able to ensure that we're renewing our water assets before we're resealing and rehabilitating roads. So in the first 2 years there, we've got $500,000 in each year. That's not quite enough for us to be able to renew the assets before we then rebuild roads on top of them, which isn't a particularly useful exercise in terms of asset planning, because it would mean that we've got aging infrastructure that's due for replacement, and we've just sealed roads over the top of them before then needing to dig them back up again to replace water mains. The two questions I would have of all of you in the preparation of our final water services delivery plan here is, are we comfortable enough with putting forward the investment plan that we've got for currently in the LTP, or should we review some of the compliance costs and ensure that they're reflected appropriately to what we think the cost might actually be?
Thank you for that, Josh. Jeremy, you have a question?
Thanks, Josh. I'm just trying to understand the figures. Did you say so the minimum cost for compliance is going to be the 7 million?
Yep, that would be the minimum. Yep. Given the water quality concerns, I'd probably say that that's understated and needs to be greater than that. My concern is if we put forward a program knowing full well that we may not be able to achieve compliance with that investment amount, that might be something that DIA come back to us and say, well, that's inadequate.
And just trying to quantify that amount back to a rate revenue take, is that's not making up the 25 to 30% that we talked about last week. I'm just trying to figure out how those two marry.
No, that wouldn't be reflected in the numbers that Ms. Nichols would have presented last week. No. Yep.
Jim.
Josh, that last question you asked us, do we adjust the program now? I'm seriously wondering, we've just banged off, because the DIA have insisted we do so, a draft proposal. We keep on hearing, including from people today, that our OPEX and CAPEX look as though they're light, and that these are areas where Wellington oversight is likely to be impacted upon us or imposed upon us and impact what we do. Doesn't it make sense to wait at least for the initial DIA response to our draft proposal before we start wondering or start looking in detail at how much we amend the capital works budget?
I'll start on a response on that. You're running out of time. We're already getting indicators that our program is not sufficient. You've got to get it in by the 3rd of September. When you think in terms of getting that to a council meeting for approval, you've got a matter of days to sort this. So if we need to think about adjusting the program, we need to start thinking about it now. Yes, we need to see what DIA come back with, but we need to think about that now if it's going to happen, because it may require the team to go away and do some work and think what that looks like to come back with, costings, proposals, timings, where that might fit into the program.
Well, supplementary then, Alex, Mr. Parmley, isn't this a situation where effectively you, Amanda, Josh, Paul need to give us some guidance? I would have thought that in this instance, based on the fact that we've been exposed to these numbers today in the last couple of weeks, yes, we're still in the process of digesting them. We're still in the process of determining the rating impact and indeed what that rating impact quantum will actually be. Bearing in mind that we can, if need be, schedule emergency or urgent council meetings, don't we need to start with some proposals from you?
We can do that. I think the purpose of the workshop was to start getting your thoughts to help guide us in putting forward some proposals to you on what we could do.
Well, my thought is, if we know that if we know the examiner, let's use a NZEA analogy, if we know the examiner isn't likely to like the answer we give to the exam question, then if we're smart, we'd change the answer. So in this instance, if everyone's saying you're not spending enough, then clearly we have to spend more. The only question is how much?
That is something that we'll endeavour to provide to you within the next few weeks.
Well, we've just been told we don't have time for that in the next few weeks.
Councillor Blackley, you've got a question.
Oh, yeah, not so much a question, but just in response to the questions put forward just now. I guess I'd be interested to know what in your professional opinions the list should represent. I mean, we've heard a few of the issues flagged, but noting that in the summary today, between the initial LTP budget through to the final LTP, there was 245 mil removed. So that's a significant amount. But then we see through the Morrison Low graphs that there's limited headroom to shift too much. So I guess if I put it in three kind of statements, I'd ask the overarching question, what would the water service organisation, had we've made that decision, be doing anyway? Is what the expected practice would be from an asset management perspective. And then I guess we need to give consideration to service level. So we've talked about the rural schemes and potential upside there, but then maybe we flip that on its head and say, well, actually, should some of these schemes remain as drinking water schemes, or do we put some of the more remote schemes on rainwater with the ability to be serviced by a water truck if there's no rainwater in that scheme, or at least a segment of the scheme reverts to stock. And then I'd just ask a question just around efficiencies. Josh, you mentioned about potential benefits being generated and the ability to shift projects further into the future on, and I take the earlier point that given what's already been carved out, there's limited upside there. But how do we kind of reposition projects that would yield some sort of benefit around metering efficiencies, trade waste, and the infiltration, addressing the infiltration, but acknowledging that there will be some flow on into the stormwater space. So Yeah, I don't know if those comments are helpful or not, but that's kind of where my thoughts are.
Few questions there, and I'll endeavour to provide an answer that's appropriate. The concern with looking at our investment program at the moment, there's several benchmarks that we're going to be assessed against. There's how much we're investing and sustainable investment within our networks to ensure that we're managing our asset appropriately. But then there's affordability benchmarks as well. There's a tension between the two, where the more we invest into our program to ensure that we're meeting the drinking water standards and we're renewing our assets appropriately, the worse the affordability benchmark looks. So I suppose my reason for asking the question is to understand the appetite as to whether we're willing to put more into one so that we're less likely to fail that, recognising that it's actually going to be detrimental to the other in terms of the affordability benchmark. And that's really only a question that our governance team can answer, as opposed to me as an officer. Me as an officer, yes, I would say that at drinking water standards, we need enough money to be able to meet the requirements there. And there's certainly options as far as, whether we do move to a rainwater tank type supply with an acceptable solution, rather than having to pre-treat the source, and then where there isn't sufficient rainfall, then we supplement with water from a tanker. That's a viable option. A lot of our community, a lot of our community might see that as a drop in service level. It would also mean that those relevant communities need to then take responsibility of the water scheme for stock purposes. So it becomes an irrigation stock supply only, rather than a drinking water supply. So that would need a certain amount of buy-in for the relevant community to enable that to occur. That is a lower cost option, but it does mean quite a lot of interaction with that particular community for them to be able to accept the lower service level. So viable option. I suppose what I want to try to put forward for you is something that is achievable, meets the standards within the timeframe that we have, and is the lowest possible cost for our community. There's a tension between time and cost there. There's a lot of conversations to happen with communities before they'll accept a lower service level. And in this case, acceptable solutions might be the quicker option to compliance. Great question in terms of improvements and the link to compliance. You'll see there in the wastewater slide that we've got up, we've reduced our total compliance related improvements in wastewater by approximately $11 million. The majority of that is within wastewater overflow mitigation. So we're essentially not stopping overflows from wastewater networks in rain events soon enough. We do need to put some further funding into our inflow and infiltration reduction program to make sure that we're getting ahead of those issues so that we don't have as many overflow events occurring. We have kept that budget consistent. That was something that we knew we needed to have a concerted effort on. The more we can do of that up front, the better effect it's going to have on the back end as we're embarking on some of the really significant renewal programs and upgrade programs. The more we can lower that peak weather flow rate, the less we've got to overbuild some of the assets that we have to build. And that's not to say that we don't have to build them. It's just that we don't have to allow for additional capacity for storm events. So very important investment. I don't think that we should cut that back any further. If anything, it would be nice to be able to put a little bit more into that. But it is a workload heavy activity, because it's not just building something. It's engaging with people, having work undertaken on private households, private plumbing. Cost of it isn't borne by council. All of that's quite resource intensive. You'll see up here the very top line that's in bold, Oamaru Wastewater Treatment Plant upgrade as a result of the resource consent requirements. The resource consent does expire in 2028. The wastewater 38. The wastewater discharge standards as the exposure drafts that have come out were very helpful for us in this space in terms of the treatment requirement the treatment level we'd need for the Oamaru wastewater treatment plant. But we still will need a very significant upgrade at that site. So it's still going to cost quite a lot of money. It would be nice to be able to put some money back in there for the latter years so that we can show that we're actually thinking about and investing in that treatment upgrade before the next 10-year period.
That's to your point earlier about putting some of the planning
Yep.
aspects of the project right at the back end. So we've got that 6-year lead in.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes. The majority of our other treatment plants don't have any monies for upgrade to be able to meet the new discharge standards within this LTP either. Most of them will be coming up next LTP, so there will still need to be a concerted investment within the next 10-year period to bring a lot of those wastewater treatment plants up to standard.
One, like if we talk about one of the wastewater upgrades being Hampden, you know, having not been in attendance at the hall where a community meeting was held, I can only comment on what I've heard, and this was some time ago, but it sounded as if a large number of the community were prepared to put the money up front for such a project. So when we have projects like that there is a willingness from the community to fund, do we put a corresponding revenue line associated with that project for that year in terms of how this modelling flows through and assumed revenue?
Yes, ordinarily we would, but so what your question is essentially where there's a community that's saying they want to increase their service level and be serviced by a wastewater system where they're currently not. Traditionally, yes, when we've got a targeted rate, we would say, well, this community is willing to have a loan to undertake this work in that location, and then that would be levied against the appropriate properties. There's probably an underlying question there as well as to whether we're remaining with a targeted rating system or whether we're moving to a district-wide rate. If we are moving to a targeted rate of a district-wide rate system, it would then be how we best rate for that across the district, because we're already seeing increasing costs for a service level shift to then occur. The remainder of the district would then pay for that.
Can I just add a challenge to that? So I think, you know, I recognise that, you know, Hampden residents or the majority of them want a wastewater scheme. I think the challenge of where we're at the moment, and this relates to our capacity, is dealing with what we've got to deal with these schemes we've already got. So thinking about building a whole new wastewater scheme when actually we need to sort out our own drinking water and wastewater schemes, and there is a more than enough program there for the team to deal with, and within the capacity we've got at the moment, and you can see the track record of delivery of our capital program. We're not delivering 100% of our capital program within waters. So to start adding new schemes when we need to make sure that we pass the test of the government on what we've got already, I think poses a challenge to the team, and obviously it then adds to the cost within our program as well.
I totally take that on board. I guess that to me is one of those projects that would potentially satisfy that third strand to the expectations around enabling housing growth, and that the constraint for that township is the requirement for a lot size that can cope with septic. So I guess that's why it's been one of interest for me personally. But anyway, sorry.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, look, I would argue that it might be premature to presuppose a majority of people in Hampden endorse the idea of a reticulated sewage network. There was a group, a goodly number of years ago, who advocated for this. The community as a whole was then surveyed because of the impact on their bottom line and the amount they would have to contribute. And the majority of respondents said no, they weren't prepared to pay the additional amount because it was very significant. And expressions of support for an idea at one public meeting do not of themselves a majority community mandate make. The other thing that we're, interestingly enough, focused on is all the projects that we do have here. We have heard today that one of the areas of concerns with LGFA, and they're predicting for DIA as well, is a significant underspend in stormwater. Now, I mean, I know there are projects, for instance, like the Muddy Creek rechanneling, that have an effect on the floodplain at the northern end of Oamaru. So they actually impact on real people's property values right now. Are things like that, and is a stormwater upgrade more generally, have we overlooked it, and do we need to actually, well, clearly the suggestion is we do need to increase the budget. I can't say off the top of my head sitting here this afternoon by how much, but do we have any estimate of what the quantum of shortfall is regarding our stormwater investment over the 10-year period?
I'll leap in here. We can't, I mean, this is the thing. It's like, oh, I want this, and this. I would still say that stormwater is the lowest of the three waters, because most of it would be nice, but we're dealing with compliance issues and significant water loss. They're far more of the priority over the next 10 years than, oh, your stormwater spending looks a bit light. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like, if we add that in, we address the renewals, we speed up some of the things, try and make affordability, it doesn't work. So, we're going to have to try and hit that sweet spot that ticks enough of the boxes. We can't tick all of them. It's just, if we tick all of them, it is completely unaffordable for the community over the next 10 years. So it's like, which one can we live with least? And I would have thought stormwater would remain, unless there are significant impacts on a large number of properties from regular, basically, stormwater incidents. And there may be actually cheaper solutions than putting in large stormwater infrastructure.
With regard to the Muddy Creek, I know I've specifically mentioned it, but ORC have identified an area at the north of Oamaru as a floodplain that is going to impact real people right now in terms of limbs and pims and all the rest of it. And if we were to do the work at Muddy Creek, we should be able then to say to ORC, be so kind as to remove the flood area classification you've imposed. So, I mean, even if we simply add that, because I know at the moment all we've got, I think, is a budget for investigation. We choked on $1 million plus that it was going to cost, but I'm wondering if it shouldn't go back in.
We'll look at it, but it's like I said, and there is also part of why we put a cap is deliverability. Like that is another aspect that they are focused on. One of the key things they asked about was what was the delivery of your program over the last 5 to 10 years. We could put in $40 million for next year. We wouldn't be able to deliver it unless we spent the next year doing nothing but recruiting people for the water team if we could find them.
Maybe just a comment to add there on the national comparison of stormwater. It's probably, in my opinion, the water where a national comparison is the least relevant, because you're so dependent on your topography of your region, of your district, your population density, the water courses, the climate. And so to compare us here with the spend that might be happening in Tasman, for example, on stormwater is a little bit meaningless.
I've just got Councillor Holding with a question, and then
getting off track a little bit, but just in the improvements and the capital work summary, like the improvements budget's the biggest chunk of the spend. So if we were to focus more on the renewals and compliance related things, is there much in the improvements? If you looked at some of that without being too much risk to delayed maintenance or tackling that budget line first? It's already built into it.
Was that in the water area or in the wastewater area or both?
In both.
In both, yeah. We've already scaled back a lot of improvement work quite significantly. In the water area, we have reduced those capacity upgrades for the Oamaru water scheme. Things such as the SCADA renewal has been put off for quite a few years. So the SCADA is our is the platform by which we monitor all of our water supplies, wastewater supplies. That's the thing that lets us know what's happening in the field, as well as provides us some level of automation and control. This has been on the radar as far as a renewal for basically since I started with council about 7 years ago. And it's been that issue of we'll wait until, you know, entity D stands up, or we'll wait until we've joined with someone else, or we'll share a system. And at some stage, we actually have to do this work to renew the systems, because they're quite outdated and the level of control that we have is relatively limited. There's some, I think overall what we've got in the program is probably right-sized. If we scale much back in the water space in particular, we're going to have some concerning issues around what we do with security of supply for the Oamaru scheme. We've put water metering back in there, so if we wanted to push that out again, we could, but that's going to have flow-on effects with respect to the capacity upgrades that are necessary. So I think the improvements area there is right-sized. In the wastewater area, I'd say that the compliance-related improvements are probably right-sized as well. We could probably add a little bit there to make sure that we're getting on top of all of the issues that are that relate to capacity restrictions before we go and upgrade a number of supplies. Yeah, the more we can get on top of the inflow infiltration issues and the trade waste issues, the better right size we can make our investment in a new wastewater system or a new wastewater treatment plant. So it's critical that we get on top of those issues as early as possible. The improvements in the improvements only, not the compliance related improvements, we've also reduced that quite significantly. So I don't really see a lot of capacity to be able to reduce those much. There's already some pain points there that we don't actually have investment to be able to work on improving some of those issues. So very long answer to your question, but I think it's probably right size now rather than us reducing it further. I've presented a lot of information, so it's probably now for everyone to ask some questions to clarify anything that we've. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Josh. Tim.
Thank you. Yeah, no, what your comments just then, Josh, I think sound reasonable and sensible. I just had a couple of questions in regard to the capital works program overall, though. Do we have any kind of inefficient consumption profiles in respect to any of our users that needs some sort of addressing, and what opportunities are in this capital works program around getting the right outcomes in terms of demand size initiatives to generate efficiencies?
To your first point around consumption profiles, I've already indicated or spoken a number of times about trade waste and the importance of us getting on top of some of those discharges. We do still have an abatement notice on the Oamaru wastewater treatment plant for the discharge there. The more we can reduce some of the capacity constraints that we have there in terms of treatment through appropriate trade waste mechanisms, the better. It's also going to mean that we treated source rather than waiting until everything's diluted in a wastewater treatment plant. So when we're going to build a new wastewater treatment plant, it's going to be right sized rather than overbuilt, taking into account that we have to deal with a lot more of a volume. So that'd be the first thing in terms of which profiles within the community. I'll probably say more of a capacity issue. We're already working with a number of businesses on both their trade waste discharge, but also their water consumption. There's quite a lot of people that are doing a lot of work in trying to invest in wiser use of water. For them, they're actually metered customers, so it's about them reducing their bills and how much they're having to pay for water. But it has the added benefit for us of increasing the available capacity within our networks. We do still have continuous concern with the Oamaru water treatment plant and the capacity at that site. When you look at the Ardgowan Dam, the Redcastle Road pumping station, security of supply from Lower Waitaki, and the amount that we can treat through the plant itself, it does get a bit close sometimes. We have obviously invested in some additional storage, so we've now got about 24-hour storage for the Oamaru scheme. That's good. It's enough. It doesn't make us particularly resilient. Having additional treated water storage would be helpful, but likewise having additional raw water storage would be helpful again. A lot of those programs that have been pushed out with the capacity upgrades for the second decade rather than the first decade. Can you possibly repeat your second question there, sorry?
Yes, I can, but just quickly on that. So there's no kind of consumers or producers of waste that are sending lumpy kind of supplies or taking lumpy amounts of supply that are creating an unnecessary burden on the infrastructure that would otherwise be lower if they had some sort of on-site solution for a 24-hour take. The second question was around demand side initiatives. If our capital works profile here allows for investment in that space.
Yeah. So to clarify the capacity issue, we're already working with some of our trade waste customers. We certainly need to expand the trade waste customers that we currently have and work with them to try to optimize their discharge to meet what we need them to meet. We've already cut off the stock effluent disposal sites from highways coming into the Oamaru wastewater treatment plant, so that's already cutting off a really strong influence. So we are already taking some steps in that area to try to make sure that we're meeting compliance requirements for the Oamaru wastewater treatment plant.
Yes, sorry, no. So demand side initiatives. So let's just put it down to an example of a household that's got affordability issues, rather than some sort of rebate to help them with affording the cost of water. There's some sort of project at this end to deliver assistance by way of rainwater tanks or something like that to essentially yield the same result from an affordability but also a consumption perspective. Is there scope within this to achieve something like that?
So I think that would be part of the metering discussion, and is the community education part that I spoke of. But without the metering, you've got no idea of knowing what any individual household is using.
In terms of rebates and the like, one of the things that we've done, well, we were doing through the revised district plan, was all new developments were going to be having rainwater tanks associated with them, so that they could use the rainwater for gardens, toilets, and those kinds of flushing elements. That I still think is a useful thing to do if that does progress, because it does mean that people aren't using town water to water vegetable gardens or flush the toilets and do laundry and those kinds of things. We're actually using rainwater for it. And certainly, within this country and overseas, you do see a number of rebate schemes for wise use of, shower heads, taps, dishwashers and washing machines and the like, where rather than giving a discount to people on their water rate, they help them by giving a rebate on water efficient devices to reduce consumption for them in the longer term, rather than having to continually pay out a rebate year on year for affordability reasons. That isn't something that would be included in the program as it is now, but that's probably a conversation that would have to come up once we move to a metering type system.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, Josh, just listening to your identification of particular areas and sites. I'm wondering if we should actually include the what looks as though it's going to be the inevitable requirement to upgrade the Ardgowan Dam in that first 10 years. I'm wondering if, based on everything you've said about wastewater overflow, we look at the reduction from 10 to 2.5, whether that shouldn't be reinstated. And I know it's a very small amount of money, but I'm wondering again, based on what you've said and the implications of the questions Tim has been asking, notably that it is possible that there may be a relatively small number of wastewater generators who are overloading the system, and who might be who, if they were required to improve their on-site storage or other facilities, might save the collective community a lot of money. So based on that, I'm wondering whether that trade waste bylaw, I know we've got it in year 2, but should we perhaps move that back to year 1?
I'll try the first question on Ardgowan Dam. And obviously there's some work that's programmed, I think, in year 1 of the LTP on Ardgowan. But the PIC rating is based on the volume of water that's stored. And one of the options we're looking at as part of this, the raw water storage strategy, is whether we can create additional storage elsewhere, which could reduce the reliance on the storage in Ardgowan and potentially result in a lowering of the water level.
Right, thank you.
In response to your other 2 questions, with respect to the honorary wastewater treatment plant, yes, moving some funding into those latter years would help in terms of ensuring that we're indicating that we need to make some investment in design for an eventual upgrade. And in terms of the trade waste bylaw, that I wouldn't think that it's something that we could take on this year. We're 2 months into the year already. There's quite a lot of concerted resource being put towards the development of a water services delivery plan. And I don't think our trade waste bylaw is fundamentally flawed, that would be the first thing we need to deal with. I'd probably rather us work on our wastewater bylaw and ensuring that we've got an appropriate mechanism to deal with inflow issues than deal with trade waste. I think the trade waste bylaw does allow us to deal with most of the issues we need to. It's just the application of the trade waste bylaw. The trade waste bylaw does need to be reviewed next year because it's coming up within that statutory timeframe though. So it's not something we need to bring forward, but it's something we need to do next year.
Yeah, we might take one more question or comment from Tim.
Thanks. I just had a question, which is probably slightly unrelated to the CapEx list itself, but what would be involved in becoming or going through the certification process for the likes of a ISO 55001, international best practice around asset management, and would that help guide our thinking somewhat, or are we already going down a route down some other path that's more relevant?
Yes, so ISO 55000 is a standard. I think there are very, very few organisations in New Zealand that are certified to do it. Us are ISO certified in that area. As an assets planning team, we are investing in training. There are 3 of us currently doing a course through Otago Polytech on improving our understanding of asset planning. We've got a new asset planning policy which sets out a number of requirements. And so we're moving towards those ISO 55000 principles, but the certification is not at all on the radar, given the complexity of getting there.
Do you think if we made a commitment to that in the long term, that could be beneficial in terms of the water service delivery plan? You know, given that the thinking is all centered around continuous improvement and, you know, starting from X and.
Yes, it's certainly building in and working on the principles. But as I say, there are many organisations much bigger than ourselves who haven't got to the compliance and certification stage. It's too onerous in terms of what we can aim for. But the best practices, we also have the APOPO guide. APOPO is the asset management industry body, and we're working towards improving our practices in those areas in line with the best practice.
And that's what informs our current policy settings.
In terms of the policy, it talks about taking a service-led approach, sustainability-driven approach, looking at data-driven analysis. So as a team, we are still in the formation stages, but very much looking to build up the accuracy and quality of our asset data, and then capitalizing on that data to be able to model and plan for the best outcomes.
And it's fair to say that there's a lot of room for improvement in the data, that the capturing of data that would be of benefit to you guys in the long run.
Yes, certainly. So that there is some small funding in there for condition assessments. So specifically on water, the assets planning team is across services, but particularly in terms of water, one of the challenges is we can't see the pipes we're talking about. So that's why CCTV of wastewater and stormwater pipes is very critical to us to understand the condition. And we've got the cast iron, 1880 cast iron pipes right through the central part of town. We've done some work on them, but we don't really know what their condition is and how long they might be able to last for. So getting better condition data is critical actually to making good decisions.
So is there sufficient scope or?
I'd say that's one of the budgets that has been cut, and it would be useful to put a bit more back into the condition assessments.
So what's needed in that space?
I suspect the original numbers were reasonable in terms of it's a sustained investment that's required over time, and it's the first couple of years that suffered that were cut through the amendments that have been made.
That's part of the LTV course, isn't it? Every time we had one.
I think from my perspective, I'd be keen to see something added back in and around your ability to actually capture some data, because I mean, ultimately that's going to inform whether or not, in some cases, we can sweat an asset or not, or possibly hear some bad news too. But if you don't know, you're kind of stuck, aren't you?
Yeah, correct. So the modelling I presented earlier was based on our knowledge of when the asset was installed and the base life that's assigned to it. It wasn't looking, with the cast iron, if we go off their base life, they're up for renewal very, very soon. If we were confident that they could last another 20 years, another 50 years, then we'd have a different discussion about deferring the renewals.
The same people who made the pipe from the wood.
So I'm not sure what others think about that, but I think we probably need to add some provision back in for that if it's been taken out, and it means you're constrained in your ability to deliver on that.
So we've covered a lot of ground and got a lot of feedback on this. I think there's some more work for us to take away now, and taking on board what you said about officers posing things. I think my initial thinking on that, and need to discuss that with the team, as we come back with a number of scenarios, really focused on that, making sure that we've got sufficiency in there for compliance. First of all, that will be the first test. But I think we know given our water loss, that we're going to be tested in terms of renewals and whether we've got sufficient in there. So we'll have a think about that in terms of what that might look like or what the options are for renewals, both in drinking water and wastewater, but also include something in there around asset planning and management, and improving our systems there, with a view to what that could look like in terms of getting optimum arrangements to use our assets, and yes, where we can sweat our assets, but also getting ahead of things as well. My gut feeling is that we spend a bit too much on reactive maintenance, which inflates our OPEX, because we're not on top of our asset planning and renewals program as much as we should be. Our focus, I think, as a council has been on meeting, those compliance. That's where a lot of the effort has gone, and we need to be more in that, planned space for maintenance and renewals of our existing assets, which should produce efficiencies in the long run. And that's, the sort of thinking that was built into the joint CCO arrangements when they were looking at that. There was efficiencies that will come from better, planning of your assets and maintenance of your assets. So if you're happy with that, that's what we'll take away. We'll come back with the options, including looking at how that impacts some of the other metrics as well. Speaking to Paul's point, and that was my opening point really to start off with, we've got to balance various different assessment factors. And if we load too much into the programme, then we're going to be way out in terms of, the affordability, which won't help our cause. So if that's okay as an action for us to take away and come back with, and then next week we have another workshop. I'm hoping by that stage we'll also have had the feedback from the DIA, which we can share what that looks like and potential responses to that as well as part of our next workshop.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Alex, for the closing summary, and thank you very much to all of our staff for the presentation and information. It's been very informative, and there's a lot there for us just to take into consideration. Thank you for those that are joining online, and also members of the public that are giving up your time to come here this afternoon and hear the information. So I think that brings us to a close. So thank you very much.